Welcome to the Public Narrative Podcast. I'm your host, Jhmira Alexander, and I'm here with Nina Sánchez of Enrich. Hey, Nina, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation to be on the podcast. I'm really eager to learn more about your work and what brought you to this space. So, if you would just share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so thanks for the invitation. My name is Nina Sánchez. I'm a second generation Chicagoan with roots in Pilsen and central Mexico. I grew up in a creative household. My father's a singer, my mom is just a creative person. And if you ever did one of those exercises where you do like a list of what you know how to do, and what you love, to try to find that dream work, right? Enrich Chicago very much represents that for me. To take my love of social justice and equity, my love and appreciation for the arts, and this work of organizing and bringing it all together into a space where we're partnering with arts organizations to think about what anti-racist, anti-oppressive institutional practices can look like. And my sense is that if we can't figure this out in arts and culture, where will we figure it out?
That's incredible, and so I've been invited into the art space through colleagues and friends who lead different art spaces, particularly right now for the work that we're doing with Congo Square Theater and their celebration of healing. They invited Public Narrative into that space to just explore, what does it look like for us to advance health equity and the storytelling in some of the in the production, how blood go, as well as the documentary screenings, just in learning more about the inequities that exist, but being able to point to the solutions across Chicago of folks who are using community engaged research in order to then bridge that gap and advance health equity. And what are some of the themes or narratives that you found, and particularly in the work that you all do at Enrich, that your work helps to address some of the conversation and the dialogue, and frankly, just present the action needed that the arts can help speak to?
Yes, thanks for that question. I think that when I consider the work that we're doing at Enrich Chicago, one of the pieces of narrative we're often confronting is this idea that inequity, racism, oppression is something that happens between two people. To really lift up the understanding that what we're confronting is a systemic context in which we're all participating at, and we're all benefiting from and all being harmed from at some level. So can we together zoom out to really understand the world that we're moving in? And can we take responsibility for what's happening from where we stand, right? To do the work that we need to do as individuals, as leaders, as creative people, to find new ways of being. So that's the second narrative, that equity and transformation is not only about doing, it's actually about being. Who are you going to be, right? And then what will you do? But first and foremost and always, who will you be?
Yeah.
Because my dear friend, Reverend Michael Russell, always likes to say, we're not human doings, we are human beings.
That is powerful. So, who are some of the human beings that help to inspire your own story?
Oh gosh, like a lot of people, their movement leaders have been so inspiring to me. People like Dolores Huerta, Yuri Kochiyama, Angela Davis, and so on. But I think the people I've learned the most from are the people who are closest to us, right? So my parents. And when I think about my parents, I think about two people whose life decisions were guarded by an aspiration not towards what was easiest, but what was right. And they raised myself and two brothers and two sisters with like the radical understanding that we were worthy, right? Brown-skinned, working class people in Chicago, we were just as worthy of anything as anybody else. And so that was paired together with a social justice education. I was very fortunate to have teachers from an early age who'd done work on the front lines in Central America during the Dirty Wars, who really wanted us to understand a true version of history, right? Not the narratives we are taught from very early on, but to understand that our history is complicated, right? That doesn't make us bad people. But what will we learn from that, and how will we act based on that knowledge? And then I add to that a work ethic that's unmatched when I think about my parents. I never knew my father to have just one job. And I used to say, gosh, I don't know how my parents did it, raising 5 kids, sending us all to Catholic school, which was very important to them. And how did they do that? And I realized I did know. He never had just one job. He had his job as an optician. He had his side hustle as an optician, whether that was working in somebody else's shop or selling glasses outside of our, through our home to our neighbors and community members. So there was always something going on to make sure that our family was able to thrive in the way they wanted us to thrive.
That's so powerful. Like, where do you see that background folding into the work that you do now?
Oh gosh, I think I see all of it folding in somehow. The most important part of the work that I do is to constantly show up to it. To constantly show up to it and have integrity for the values that we say we are holding, and showing up, and when it goes wrong, because it does, continuing to show up and trying it again, and to really think about how am I modeling in every way possible the level of discernment that moving towards transformation requires of us. How am I modeling integrity for the work that we're holding so that we're not bringing people along who actually aren't ready to come along, and so that we can say no, right? I think that's one of the things we've worked hardest around, is to be able to say no, not this partnership, not this time, so on. And that is all rooted in justice, and it's all rooted in coming to the community from a place of love and compassion, and being relentless and not giving up, even when I'm feeling tired and crispy around the edges sometimes.
It sounds like you've learned how to preserve your energy for the long haul. I love that about just reserving your right to say no and assessing what is needed at the time, and not welcoming or accepting the pressure that folks may try to project that you should go in this direction or go in that. Like, what leads you to lead from that perspective?
I think that I've been called to lead that way in part because of some hard lessons, right? When I didn't say no, when I did too much, and I always do too much. I'm a Leo. I'm always doing too much, and really having some significant disappointments, regardless of the amount of energy, time, and effort I put into it. Having experiences where I was just burnt out beyond comparison and not seeing it, and then really not being able to show up in a way that I feel proud of or that was effective. I think that holding the line and organizing for the long haul, you have to be able to do that, and at the same time you have to be able to accept that it won't be okay with everybody. And it's been hard, it's come at some cost, and I still feel okay that and centered that this is how we need to be right now. But I'm not locked into it. I think that I was the first full-time director of the organization, and as people have come to the organization and through and moved on and all the rest, both from our partner side and from our team side, part of what I've worked really hard to communicate, and I want to keep communicating it, is that I'm not wedded to any of this. Right? I don't have ego in this work in some of the way people might believe that I do. I joke and I say, when you grew up in a Mexican American household, you don't get participation medals, right? And so I critique and feedback and all the rest. I love it. Bring it. I welcome it. I'm looking for it because I'm certain, more than I am anything else, I'm certain I'm not going to be right 100% of the time. And so I think that can be challenging in movement spaces as well, because we do want to default to who is the singular leader, who is the voice, who is the face of this organization. And for better or for worse, I haven't wanted that to be me. And that's not always worked. But that is just like the stumble block, right, that I'm learned to embrace, because I'm certain that if we really do want to be about the business of transformation, eventually we're going to have to all get there together. And so being able to say no and step back and take my lumps when I've got to take my lumps is something I've just grown increasingly comfortable with.
It's something you said about like not accepting that traditional approach to leadership and just kind of like being the sole spokesperson, like being able to share that responsibility. I like to think of it in this way. A lot of the issues that we're facing and confronting in our work were here long before we got here. And so it requires a measure of patience and grace that everyone's going to have to exercise, but everybody's also going to have to show up in the solution portion of it, like brainstorming, ideating, troubleshooting. And I've had to learn this through the years, but I'm seeing it played out in so many other spaces. What do you do when you've done all the things? You've done everything right. You've done exactly as you were led to do, you were called to do, and you don't always get the outcome that you desired. How do you bounce back from that?
Yeah. Oh, that's a tough spot to find yourself in, and I think it's a healthy spot to find yourself in. I think for me, I've been with Enrich now almost 5.5 years. I kind of have been understanding my tenure there and the nature of the work that's been happening actually since 2014 to be very cyclical, right? And so I've tried to really just like become comfortable with that, right? Like, okay, we're at this spot again. What do we do right now? We're gonna pause and then, mend our wounds, dust ourselves off, take a break, and then let's come back to this again together and think about what are we going to do next first. And I regard it as largely cyclical, and I'm seeking in that process not to just end up back where we started, but to think about this as like a spiral, right? So if we're going around each time, right? If we're going to try it again this time, then what's our minimal level of success going to be this time? Right? What's our ideal version of success, and what's the minimal level of success we're trying to achieve here? And trying to build in my sense of patience around that and my sense of focus around that, and then doing the narrative work that's necessary to bring people along with me who want to come along with me. Right? Who is that coalition of the willing? I'm well aware that if we were to wait for the people in power to step up and do what they needed to do to right our situations, we've been waiting long enough. It's not going to happen, right? So I think about this, who is the coalition of the willing, and then what's the amount of agitation we're positioned to bring as Enrich Chicago externally to people and organizations that's going to maybe give a jolt and get them to come back to the table and refocus and understand, guess what? You don't have it as all together as you thought you did. None of us do. So now what are you going to do about it?
That's something, because that very statement, folks can take offense to it if they're not willing to do the work, and recognizing that it's not a critique at all. It's an observation that requires some measure of action on the back end. And I think, I would hope, I shouldn't say I think, but I would hope that we're in a moment now where it's clear that we can't just verbalize our intentions. We have to actualize them and have concrete plans that invite the right partners to be a part of that process. How do you identify like who to invite into that? I mean, certainly you're not dragging anyone. I hear you loud and clear. There's no room for dead weight. Everyone has to play their part. But how do you identify those who are sincere in playing their part?
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing process too. When I came to Enrich Chicago, there was 21 organizations. It was an initiative started by, I'm going to get it wrong now, it was either 6 or 9 organizations originally that really came together, kind of grassroots organizing. They grew it to 21, and then they said, okay, we've got to make this official, we've got to hire staff. Everyone was doing this in addition to a role elsewhere, right? And so here I come, and one of my mandates was to grow the membership. We have this waiting list of like 60 organizations who want to be members of Enrich Chicago, and I was like, okay. So my process was, first, what does it mean to be a member? And then 2, yes, based on what it means to be a member, what are the conversations we want to have with this group of stakeholders who are saying they want in, right? And so we went about it in that way to think about, right, so what were the clear doings that they had to do to actually be invited into the circle?
Yeah.
We wanted to be very clear. This isn't diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is anti-racist transformation and anti-racism organizing. We're going to say these words. We mean, this is what we mean by them, and this is what we're expecting you to do. It needs to be the CEO, to be the first person to sign on. Do you want to do this? Yes. If so, why? And if yes, then what are you willing to stop doing? Okay. Will you come to a 2.5-day workshop? We want you to make sure, we want to check on you.
That's the commitment.
And now it's going to be 3 days. They don't know this yet. Surprise. We want to check the analysis you have. And we want to make sure that when you use these words, you understand what you mean and that you're doing the work in a way that is holding true to a core set of principles. And then once you do that, if you haven't run away screaming, or made such statements as, we should never say the words white supremacy again, then we'll talk about how many of your staff you're going to send to this kind of workshop year over year, the meetings you're going to show up to, and the people from your organization that you're going to bring with you to then build a plan and build a team to carry this work forward within your institution. That was the initial set of commitments that all of our members made to Enrich Chicago. There's a nominal dues that they pay that is not really about membership organizations in the traditional sense as much as it is. It was designated to a regranting fund to BIPOC arts organizations. So there's this nominal dues that they pay to be a part of the circle. And then we partner with those organizations year over year to say, okay, what are your goals and priorities for this year? And then checking in at regular intervals throughout the year in a group setting to understand how is it going, right? How many people are you continuing to send through to these learning experiences? What is your level of participation from you and your institution in our various affinity spaces? So on and so forth. So those are some of the things they can do to signal commitment. But then we want to go deeper than that too, to understand what are the patterns we're seeing over time.
Totally.
Right? And I think that's one of the most important things that Enrich Chicago can offer is to say, all right, everybody, we're giving you opportunities here by self-report to share what's going on. We're not out to get you. We're here to be supportive to you. Here's some of the learning we'll do together. And by the way, here's some data that we want to present to you about the state of our arts sector right now. What is it that we need to know? Because of that, we did a big report on the level of funding equity between historically white and Eurocentric arts organizations and people of color arts organizations. We're currently working on a racial equity impact survey to understand, right, in the spirit of all of the declarations that were made, particularly post the murder of George Floyd, for all your aspirations and statements, what is actually true and substantively different on the lives and careers of BIPOC professionals in and around your organization, right? So I think where we have a really important role to play as in Chicago is to say, one, to point out the evidence that is in front of us at any given moment, and then two, to be able to back that up to say, and here's the data, right? Because people want data. And so if that is something that's going to move the needle on understanding, move the needle on what you're actually doing and to sustain equity in your organization and to build an equity culture in your organization, then that's what we'll do. I think that where candidly we still have work to do is to understand what is this going to look like over the long term, right? Now that we've had members who have been with us since 2014, others have been with us for at least 4 years, then we're at an inflection point now to understand, okay, how do we renew in this commitment together? And is there a way to strengthen our accountability to people of color by virtue of the work that we do as a standard practice?
Now, is this specific to arts institutions, or is it a broader engagement among various industries?
It is specific to the arts and culture sector. So we engage with arts producing organizations, museums, multidisciplinary in the arts, and also foundations that fund the arts. And so our foundation partners, many of them fund Enrich Chicago, but they also show up to these learning and community spaces, and they're doing their own work as well, right? we did the research project. I think actually initially came from a foundation stakeholder. They want to say, well, what do we actually know about who's funding what and to what extent? And I know as a result of that research that many of our foundation partners changed their program areas, they changed the application process, they have work to show for it and outcomes to show for it in terms of increasing the amount of funds that are going to BIPOC arts organizations. But overall, yes, it is arts and culture specific and primarily nonprofit entities.
How do you see this work? Because it's incredible. There's so many layers to it. How do you see this work helping to shift the public narrative?
I think part of what it's helping to do is to help us all get on the same page, to understand that the question is not, is the arts and culture sector racist? The question is, how is the arts and culture sector racist or oppressive? Right. So I think that is one huge narrative shift that we've achieved and are continuing to work on. When I first learned about Enrich Chicago, I was working in education, focusing on equity issues. But I remember reading an article in Cranes, and I read the article and I said, "Oh my God, they're saying these things, and I think they mean the same thing I mean when they say them." And at the time, in 2014, nobody else was talking about this. I can say with certainty that now in Chicago in arts and culture, if you aren't talking about it, it's very rare. So I think that some of the narrative shift already that has happened is that people understand that they have work to do.
And would you say that we're seeing it in the productions that arts spaces are, or theaters particularly, are choosing to produce?
I can say anecdotally, yes. I think that part of what I'm looking at is how do we do a better job of collecting some of that information so that we can strengthen the narrative around it and the external communication of actually here's what has actually changed, right? X Theater went from doing 0 to in the last year having 2 productions that were created by, produced by, and performed by people of color. So I think that that's actually part of what I'm interested in strengthening for Enrich Chicago, is to get a better handle of systematically collect that information and be able to my dream is a dashboard, like year over year. Here's what's changing year over year. And then when we're seeing something kind of like step back, all right? And what is the pattern over time that we're seeing?
And what would you hope the pattern to be?
I think it's a little more complicated for me than saying I want to see more people on these stages, in these galleries, and so on, because yes, I do want that. And more than anything, I want them to come into those spaces being fully cared for and respected as human beings. I think with regularity in Chicago, we see something out in whether it's like the social media or some article or something, where there is consistently this behavior that is damaging to BIPOC creators, actors, dancers, and the whole lot, right? We see those kinds of stories show up, not infrequently. It's with regularity. And so for me, I would love to see, yes, more of them, not at the expense of their humanity and not at the expense of their experience as professional people creating beautiful art for us to enjoy and support.
Totally. This is a significant charge that you're leading, and I'm really curious, like, how do you preserve your own humanity in that? Because it's real easy to lose yourself in like navigating something so much bigger than you, right? But how do you preserve yourself, and what methods or forms of self-care do you implement?
Oh gosh. I was just talking with a colleague today, and we kind of shared war stories, so to speak, right, around this work. I think I always remember that the world we live in is inherently dehumanizing. Right? I carry that with me everywhere I go, and again, because of my parents, because of my experiences growing up, moving from a predominantly Mexican neighborhood to a changing white neighborhood, and going to elitist high schools and post-secondary institutions, right? I'm constantly reminding myself I am worthy. I am constantly thinking about what is the boundary I'm setting here in this relationship with you, in this moment, in this conversation, and over time for perpetuity. What am I demanding of you if you wish to be in relationship with me right now? And reminding myself that it's okay to walk away. Right? So those are two things that are essential for me to like be able to stay in this. And again, I'm going to bring Dr. Michael Russell into this podcast because I think he talks about racism and oppression as being something that's crazy making, right? And if that is crazy making, then really the work that I'm doing is about driving myself sane. Okay? Because I'm pretty certain that we're not wrong. Of that I'm pretty certain of. And so I'm just trying to stay grounded in that. I'm not wrong. Maybe it's a little bit, some days it feels quixotic. Some days it feels too big. On those days, I go sit on my parents' couch because there's nowhere you can, for me, where I can be as fully myself as my parents' house.
Totally.
Or sitting around their kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a pan dulce. For me, it is going today, before coming here, I went to my daughter's circus camp class and watched her jump on the trampoline and do her crazy tumbles and, just be in her body and be in herself. And so when I need to feel cared for, it is always in relationship to the people I love and hold most closely to me.
And those people, I know for me, very similar. It's being among people who my titles don't matter to. They don't care about my leadership. They don't care about any of that. They care about me as a person. And they allow my personhood to be what draws us together. And, and I feel cared for. It's not just in like theory, but like I truly feel that. And the relationship is built on that. So for sure, being able to unplug in that way. But I'm wondering, like, what do you see the future of Enrich Chi?
When I think about the future of Enrich Chicago, I think about two things. One, in the immediate future, we have some sector-wide research that's happening that I think is going to be really important as a means for us to reground in how we want to continue to do our work together. And do we want to continue doing our work together, right? So that's the Racial Equity Impact Survey. That's a second funding equity research study. So those are two things that I think are going to be really important to setting us on our next circle, right? Our next cycle of learning and growth. The second piece of it is continuing to lean into this idea and this thinking I've been doing around the fact that so often, and this holds true even for Enrich Chicago, when we do racial equity work, anti-racism, or you name it, too often we end up giving our resources, whether that's time or money, to organizations who are trying at the expense of organizations that are doing. As Enrich Chicago, how do we begin to evolve the portfolio of work and relationships that we hold to be in greater proximity, relationship, accountability, and support to BIPOC artists and arts organizations? Some of that has already started, and that's some of the work I'm most excited about, to think about organizations like Congo Square, right? And teeny tiny organizations that have been out here doing it on shoestring budgets, no full-time staff, no real structural support from anywhere, but their work is absolutely essential and already lives into these principles and values that we say we have, right? So how do we do more of that to really think about the field building we're doing as one that's not just focused on building a cohort of anti-racist leaders in historically white organizations, but to sustain the leaders who are doing work in our BIPOC communities.
Absolutely. You lift up so many things, but the thing that I want to touch on now is clear how much of a change maker you are in the type of space that you've cultivated alongside your team in creating space to address or to create an anti-racist system. Have you all looked beyond arts and culture, or is that just like the sweet spot that Enrich Chicago occupies and will continue to fortify for, the rest of its days?
I don't know about the rest of Enrich Chicago's days. If I think of the rest of my days at Enrich Chicago, whenever that is, I have ideas. I think yes. I think that we have a small team. We're actually twice the size that we were when I started, and still there is an abundance of work, right? That now we get to say no to. But we feel really in favor of a depth of work rather than a breadth of work. So even when people come to us wanting us to do some training work or group coaching and consulting with them, we're not interested in a one and done experience. There is too much of that. People think they've gone to the workshop, they get the badge. I'm like, I've got my anti-racism badge, I'm good to go. Yes. And that's not it, right? We're really fortunate that for most of my time at Enrich Chicago, we partner with another organization called Crossroads, Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. And they do a whole lot of work with other kinds of institutions in education and social services in the nonprofit sector broadly, and they're great. And so I feel good leaving that to them for the time being.
Yes, for sure. How can folks connect with Enrich Chicago?
If they want to experience some of the anti-racism learning work that we do, they can register for a workshop right off of our webpage. They're about every other month at this point. enrichshy.org is our website. If they want to sit down and just have a conversation, if they're in an arts organization right now and they want to understand how we work with arts organizations over the course of a 12-month or more engagement to do some learning and organizing work, they can email me directly through our webpage as well.
Excellent. Nina, it's been so great to be in conversation with you. Thank you for joining us for the podcast. And thank you for joining us for the Public Narrative Podcast. I'm your host, Jhmira Alexander, and we'll see you